Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it. On today's episode, demonic sea lions, friendly Italians, REI apologizes, and a wandering wolf. And this will conclude our first season of the Wildlife Wire. Thank you so much for listening. I told Sam to sing me a song about an iPhone, and then Sam sung.
Really? That's no. You wanted to kick it off with a lame joke. This is how we're
Listen, they're not
today.
lame jokes; they're dad jokes.
Your first story is about demonic seals.
Well, actually, demonic sea lions.
Oh, okay. Do tell me about this pinniped that is possessed.
Possessed pinnipeds
Yes.
poaching people on the coast of California.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So there has been a handful of attacks by sea lions who are being called a horde of demonic sea lions. I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I feel like we shouldn't anthropomorphize the seals to be so naughty. Continue.
Yeah. Well, so according to John Warner, CEO of the Marine Mammal Care Center in Los Angeles, these animals are reacting to the fact that they're sick. And so they have one mauled a surfer. He bit him in his buttocks.
Okay.
And then another bit a swimmer. And the problem is that there is a toxic algae bloom that's happening on the southern coast of California.
Huh.
And at least 195 of these sea lions have been stricken with an illness directly coming from that bloom. And so at first, the sea lions become lethargic and kind of just in a daze, and then they get really aggressive. And at that point, the surfer guy who was bitten in the buttocks.
I like how we're going buttocks.
Well, the story says
seal got him right on the butt.
Yeah, it says it bit him in his left
sea lion
butt cheeks.
Okay,
cheek, but
butt cheek. Okay, all
yeah.
right on, not on the right one, the left butt.
Yeah, because you got to be able to visualize the story.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope he's okay. Is he okay?
He's okay. He's giving like the hang loose sign while he's laying on his belly in the emergency room. He said that this creature looked like nothing I'd seen before. Its expression was feral, almost demonic, devoid of the curiosity or playfulness that they normally exhibit.
Huh.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's called domic acid toxicosis.
Does it go away?
And it's from gobbling down fish exposed to the toxic bloom. Does it go away? I don't know. They don't really dive into, has this happened before? Does it go away? Is it fatal?
I need to know the epidemiology of the demonic disease.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I would love to tell you more, but that's all I got.
Okay, but Mark, we can't just tell people that sea lions are possessed. We've got to let people know whether or not they can be unpossessed.
Yes. I mean, I think with a priest, obviously.
Obviously. Yes. Perfect. I like this. Great. Well, I have a friendlier animal, and maybe we can, follow up with the listeners to let them know if the sea lions will get better.
This animal doesn't do any attack of the buttocks?
No, this animal has not bit any butt cheeks lately, and it's more about a friendly relationship between people and animals by practicing common sense coexistence measures.
Hmm.
And I'm going to take us on a journey. Do you want to know where we're going?
Please enlighten me.
Please join me for a beautiful trip to Pettorano Salgizio. I hopefully said
Is
that
that in Georgia?
correctly. No, it's a medieval mountain town in Italy, and it's beautiful. There's tons of wildflowers. It has all these sunbathed buildings, and it's very picturesque. All these vines and things started growing back around the town. And originally in the well, before the 1900s, but in 1920, about 5,000 people lived in the town. It was an agrarian town. There was lots of ranching going on and livestock production. And in fact, old murals on the town walls show hillsides that have been stripped of all of their foliage by grazing. But the hills are alive in Italy with the sound
I,
of
I held
bears.
back so much from singing right there.
With the sound of bears. And they are actually home to a critically endangered species of brown bear, the Marsican bear. And the bears are only endemic to this specific region in Italy. And for a long time, there was conflict with the bears because livestock bears conflict. Many of the townspeople were saying, "Hey, these bears are particularly problematic." However, after the town started to shrink down and fewer and few people were there because of the aging population of the town, and fewer and few people were ranching there, they started to see a younger generation move in, and because it was available housing, it was a little more affordable. And the younger people started coming up with ideas to live with the bears. And now there's all of these wonderful bear murals around the town. They've really rewilded all of the hillsides, and they've implemented a ton of common practice or common sense non lethal measures like electric fencing. They still have beehives and chickens. They have a lot of farm to table restaurants. And by 2017, just in 3 years of practicing, of implementing bear friendly practices, they had reduced their bear conflicts by 99%.
Wow.
So, and the whole town adopted them. They have informational signage everywhere. There's almost no damage, and they still appreciate their bears. People still will bear watch there, and there are now 18 bear smart communities across Europe. And it's a good story on what folks can do when we shift our practices on the way we look at animals and how we can best live with them. And they've also substantially increased their tourism. So revenue is coming into the town again now because of the bears. So it's really incredible. There are a lot of citizen science programs happening there. A lot of naturalists have moved there, and it's a beautiful example of coexistence, but also how by just living with wildlife, they really created a thriving economy too, and a great place to live. So that's Italy for you. And the bears are doing well in this beautiful little town in Italy, and I'd love to go there one day and check it out for myself.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I feel like some of those towns should partner with Colorado towns. You know, I'm thinking specifically like Durango, who's notorious for having bear conflict, and then they get the resources like new trash cans that are bear proof, but then people aren't using them properly, and we're still having bear conflict. You know, Boulder, Colorado also has bear problems, and I'm sorry, Boulder does not have bear problems. Boulder has people
People problems,
problems
yeah.
that are contributing to bears just doing what bears do and trying to eat free food.
Right. And I think that's an important note for everyone is that wildlife are acting just off of their instincts. They're just being the types of animals they are. And most conflicts can be resolved by human prevention and human solutions. And I would love to see bear smart requirements across the country in places where there's bears. It's really helpful at preventing conflicts and it's really helpful for bears to thrive. So,
Yeah, and I know Colorado Parks and Wildlife is doing a big initiative with bear-friendly communities or coexisting with bears. I'm interested to see how all of that gets implemented on the ground.
yeah, there's also funding. There's a bill in Washington state right now that would provide Bear Smart funding to communities too. So I think that there's opportunity here. I'm excited to see that Italy is lighting the way with their beautiful town, and they are not sorry about it. Because I know
Bellissimo.
someone's sorry, and who's sorry today, Mark?
REI is sorry.
Ooh, is it too late for REI to apologize?
No, they're apologizing. They already apologized.
Oh, okay. Well, let's hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And so REI, I worked for REI for 9 years.
Hmm.
And this headline says that letter was a mistake.
Ooh,
REI apologizes for supporting Interior Secretary Doug Burgum.
Burgum. Okay.
Burgum.
Okay.
So he was the former North Dakota governor. And so REI has a new president and CEO. Her name is Mary Beth Lafton. She sounds very fun.
Mm-hmm. Full of
And
laughter. Is that what you're
yes,
getting
a
at? Wow.
joyous
Okay.
woman. And so REI, along with 32 other outdoor organizations, expressed strong support for Burgum following his appointment by President Trump. And she has since walked that back. And uh, they say that uh, Burgum is undermining the country's public lands. So, with this letter, the one of the biggest problems was I mean, recently he came out and said with the colossal news, he was like, "Oh, that's great. We don't need to do any more endangered species work. We can just bring them back." He's like, "Oh God, this guy
Mark,
is
neither of
running."
us did the colossal news. We'll have to talk about that next.
Yeah,
But go
we'll
ahead.
rewind there in a second. So, REI obviously has a lot of weight, but, I don't know how much at this point it's going to uh, impact change in Washington. He's already there. They've already started their destruction. She was really concerned with the mass layoffs and hiring freezes, canceling their ranger programs, reducing visitor center hours, and closing hikes. And, you know, companies like REI rely on these open spaces, these national parks and federal lands and state lands and everybody to be able to get their customers out there and enjoying them. And so when they have someone in there that's threatening that, it's obviously bad business for their organizations. So it was nice to see the apology, but I don't. It's not going to do much.
Yeah, sad to see the support in the first place, really. It seems like so many corporations are just lining up to kiss the ring of the Trump administration. Um, I would like to, for our last story today, tell you a colossal tale, I guess.
Ooh.
A colossal story, if you will. The final of all of the stories. And that story is that dire wolves are back.
Are they?
They are, well, that's the big question. One, are they? Two, what does this mean? So, Colossal is an organization that is looking at de-extinction. And de-extinction means how do we bring animals back that were previously extinct? You had talked earlier in one of our episodes about the woolly mouse that was
Mm.
like the most adorable, fluffy mouse. And what they had done was use mammoth DNA, parts of it, to get the mouse to give that fluff. And it was very Jurassic Park adjacent, Jurassic Park esque. And right now, Colossal is claiming that it has brought back the dire wolf by creating three dire wolf pups. They used a domesticated dog as a surrogate and dire wolf DNA mixed with wolf DNA. And they have shown pictures of these wolves as they've grown. The wolves are on a sanctuary somewhere with thousands of acres to roam. They're allegedly secure. Again,
Is Jeff Goldblum there?
sounds like Jurassic Park. Jeff Goldblum is telling us that life will find a way. And I I think there's so many interesting implications to this story. And it, it it's fascinating the work. Our previous guest Dan Flores touched on some of the ethical implications of de-extinction and what that could mean. And I really think that it's it's so complex. I have so like how do we decide who lives, who dies? And are we already doing that as humans? And should we be bringing back species that have been extinct for such a long period of time? And or does this mean we can add genetic viability to different species that are endangered now by creating these clones or are we calling them clones? Direwolf clones?
I don't know what they're calling them, but
I don't I,
yeah.
I, I don't know either, but there's a lot to really unpack around playing God in this way, or goddess or whatever in your point of religious view. It's it's interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, preferably I like to say they're playing young Frankenstein, but
Okay, got it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, one, they have such little DNA from actual dire wolves, so unless they can kind of reverse, like to purify the DNA and get like build up a higher percentage of dire wolf DNA over generations, like I don't think we would ever at this point, the way they're doing it, would they would never get a 100% dire wolf,
Right.
but maybe they could get it closer where it's 90 something percent. Um, I think it's an interesting move scientifically and, advancing in those areas. But, like when Secretary Burgum said, oh, we don't need to do anything now because we can just bring them back. But part of the whole, Endangered Species Act and protecting the animals that we have here today is that we're also giving them space and we have their food sources and like all of those pieces are super important. You just can't plop something down and say job done.
Yeah, especially when it's a copy and not the real deal. I also think that our endangered species are really the canary in the coal mine of the impacts we're having on ecosystems and on the environment. And animals are there because of what we are doing. And to not mind what we're doing and then say, oh, we'll just throw some other animals out and fix it. We're just throwing them out to die, not for a healthy environment. And that's the part that is really concerning to me is that it removes those other parameters that the Endangered Species Act really provides for. And it's disturbing that politicians would embrace this in such a way. And I do think there's a ton of ethical implications around bringing back species that have been extinct for so long. Even what Chris Servine talked about with island populations, right? To not have these animals ever be able to live fully wild lives is really concerning too. There was one other news story I kind of thought we could loop into this a bit, and that's that um, Colorado does have its own wolf population, and we had talked about islands and isolation and what this means for recovery because gray wolves are state endangered here. And interestingly, I think as we restore species and as we work towards species, without the Endangered Species Act and endangered species protections at the federal level, we get different policies across state lines. And I think that impacts our wolves and our other species as well. Um, in my news story, we talk about a wolf that's traveled 100 miles around Colorado but hasn't left yet. But if that wolf were to leave Colorado and go to Utah, we would literally go, Utah would bring it back and put it back in Colorado. And same thing if a Mexican wolf leaves New Mexico or Arizona, someone brings it back. And so all of this kind of human interference on different levels, I just don't know what it says about intact ecosystems or the possibility of having animals thrive in the way they once were.
Very well put.
Well, thank you, Mark, for just
Yeah,
sitting in
but
awe of my points. I
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
that
That
was
works for me.
like a soliloquy. Yeah, and I mean, you brought up New Mexico, and they're having big struggles now with certain communities trying to uh, take emergency action on Mexican gray wolves that are recovering there, and they're it's getting, of course, blown out of proportion, and they're overpopulated, which is an insane idea to me. And but it's just dialing down the temp a little bit and figuring out, okay, what's going on, and how can we look to Italy to
Yeah.
coexist with these animals?
Italians in one small town have figured it out with bears, so we too can do it here. And it's certainly the hope I have for all of us in this country is how do we move together towards a brighter future for wild animals and the people whose health is so intertwined to them. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that enough is that the health of our species, we're a keystone species in our own ecosystem. How do we keep our ecosystem healthy and keep our species healthy? And it depends so much on other species
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into our guest this week. We have two guests,
too.
and they're going to talk about coexisting with a portion of wildlife that often gets overlooked, but that's our urban and suburban wildlife,
Oh,
and what we can
awesome.
do to mitigate any harm to people and to those animals. So
Well,
stay
great.
tuned.
Thanks, Mark. Looking forward to it.
Well, we are joined by two special guests today. This is a first for the Wildlife Wire, and I'm really excited to talk about a different piece of wildlife issues that doesn't often get talked about, and that's urban wildlife and wildlife that can be sometimes classified as nuisance animals. And so we have Jack Murphy here, who is the co-founder of Urban Wildlife Rescue in Colorado. And we also have Katherine McGill, who founded 411 Wildlife Solutions in Florida. And we are going to discuss with her some changes in that organization and then also broader impacts of what it is that wildlife in these urban areas face. So Jack, I'll turn it to you first. If you can just give me a background and our listeners a background on why you started Urban Wildlife Rescue and uh, what you hoped to how you hope to benefit animals by doing so.
Okay, yeah, good question. It started we started rehabilitating back in like 1988. We formed Urban Wildlife Rescue in '91, incorporated as a nonprofit corporation, 501(c)(3), and at the time we were basically doing wildlife rehabilitation. And starting in the early 90s, started also getting calls from people that say, well, we don't have baby squirrels or an injured animal, but we have like animals living in our attic or something living under our porch. And um, we looked for people to refer to. And my wife and we actually called several of the companies around the area and quickly found out that most of these guys are just killing everything or not doing things very humanely. And so that's when I started looking into doing it myself, doing it in a humane way. So since about maybe 1990, 91, I have been doing humane wildlife control, non-lethal humane wildlife control. And, you know, and a lot of that involves education. I mean, probably 90% of the phone calls I get, either people don't have a problem or it's a problem they can easily solve by themselves. And so that's mainly what I put the efforts into now is dealing with, for lack of a better word, nuisance wildlife conflicts.
And so with that education piece, I mean, can you dive into a little bit about what are some of the most common pieces that people just are missing, that education side of things, and how to resolve these conflicts. And that question is for both of you.
Okay, yeah, I could answer that. Yeah, it's I used a line a lot that people thought was kind of funny, that people always say you need to get this animal. It's in the city. Take it back out to nature where it belongs. And I always like to tell people that I've got all kinds of maps, and none of those maps have a little line that says nature starts here. If you're living on planet Earth, you're living in nature. That's the way it is. And no matter where an animal goes, especially on the Front Range of Colorado, no matter where that animal goes, he's on somebody's property. Now it's a matter of, do we want animals to exist? Because there's a lot of people that just they don't want animals anywhere near their house. And a lot of people don't realize that the animals need a place to live too. And most of the animals don't cause problems. I mean, if they're in your house or something, yes, that's a problem. But one of the things I see now is people with their Ring cameras. They call me up at 3 o'clock in the morning because they saw a fox walking down the street. And it's like, you're living in Colorado. What were you expecting? Ponies and unicorns? No, we have wildlife here. That's what we have.
Is there a state that you would recommend that I could get ponies and unicorns on my Ring camera?
Possibly California, but I don't know.
I think you might be right there. The Ring cameras, we've seen that as a increasing problem because people just see what they used to not see. And animals that used to always be there are suddenly being seen by everybody. And I'm wondering, Katherine, as you go, what species are we calling nuisances? What are these animals that we've given this unfortunate title to? And anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, adding to what Jack said, that the underlying problem is that there is this ingrained paradigm, this knee-jerk reaction, and the belief that the only way to resolve my problem is to remove the animal. Remove the animal, and my problem is gone. And that's what we have to change. The doorbell cameras, security cameras that everybody has now is not just a problem because they're seeing animals that they hadn't seen before, but because the trapping regulations in a lot of states allows them to take action on that, even though it was just a sighting. There was no actual conflict. What is a conflict? And that's not defined. What is a nuisance is not defined. What is property damage? So an animal stepping on a 32-cent potted plant, or getting into trash. The definition of nuisance animal needs a lot of work in most states.
Yeah, and the definition of conflict needs a lot of work too. That's for sure. So are we talking then, what animals are you dealing with? Are we looking at raccoons, foxes, squirrels, all of the above and more? What are your calls about?
Yes, all of the above and more, starting with rats and mice all the way up to, even to bears and deer. And, agencies have their own contractors like here in Florida for bear conflicts and that, but we still get calls. But typically here we don't deal with, the bears or the alligators, but everything else, yeah, pretty much.
And so you brought up agencies. So how do state wildlife agencies account for urban wildlife, and whether those animals are being killed or removed, or any capacity that is there any oversight in state agencies with those animals?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Not really. Basically, and especially in Colorado, to put it really bluntly, if the animals aren't making money for the state, then they're considered a varmint or just don't care. And so, for the most part, they don't keep track of how many raccoons, foxes, coyotes, skunks, prairie dogs, squirrels, and numerous other species, how those animals are, treated, unless it's something really heinous. But basically, any homeowner can trap an animal at will. There are regulations on relocation. Most people don't know about that, so the law is being violated numerous times every day because people are not aware of what the laws are on wildlife. But basically, the state doesn't really put a lot of emphasis on what you would call the nuisance wildlife, unless it's game species like deer eating hay or a bear in a trash can. That they will deal with. But if it's a raccoon in a dumpster, they tell you they don't care.
Yeah, I think that's sad though too, because so many folks in urban areas, that's the only way they see wildlife. as well. Um, and many of us in more rural areas, we appreciate animals like a red fox. Like if I'm seeing a red fox and everyone's like, oh, there's this adorable fox down the road, everyone is excited to see the fox, but they don't know that if one person is upset about the fox can be trapped and killed. Yeah. And I hope that we can add that piece to education too, as we talk to communities, because it's always it only takes one person to lose an animal that everyone else treasures and enjoys knowing is alive in the community.
I've seen that happen a lot.
Wow.
Our neighbors are all upset, when that happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a story about that, Jack? A particular instance?
Well, I give a one quick story that just comes to mind that, it's probably been about 15 years ago or so. I had some folks down south of the Denver metro area, and people were starting to see rats underneath their bird feeders. And so they asked me to come down and speak to their homeowners association, and I did. And, it's really hard to control rats once you get them into an area. And so I told them that, you might have to control food, stop feeding animals, change where you're going to feed them, things like that. And I said, the one thing you really need is foxes in the area, because that area traditionally had a lot of foxes. And the people said, yeah, we used to have a family of foxes here, but this guy moved in down the street. He didn't like them, so he hired a trapper, and they trapped the whole family and killed them all. And so that's why they now have a big rat problem, because you don't have predators eating the rats. So that's just one example, but I see stuff like that all the time. I've actually had to sit there and go back and sit in my truck while two neighbors are arguing over, I'm there to get squirrels out of an attic, and the other neighbor's feeding the squirrels, and they think that somebody's going to hurt the squirrels, and like almost ready to go into a fist fight. So I just go back and wait in the truck until all the dust clears.
Katherine, you want to add on there?
Yeah, I would like to, because this gets into something that I've been focused on this past year, working on with the Florida State FWC agency. They're reforming our trapping regs as we speak. And one of the things that I've been advocating for is to, and some states already do this, I believe Illinois is an example, where the public has to basically get permission before they take action against the wildlife, which they have to do if it's a game species, right? So the property rights argument doesn't fly if it's a bear or a deer, turkey or a game species. But if it's a squirrel or a raccoon or, fox, coyote, then all of a sudden, well, it's my property. I can do what I want. But that wildlife, just because he or she's on your property, doesn't mean he or she is yours, right? The wildlife belongs to all and to no one. So you have neighbors conflicts where, one neighbor loves the squirrels and her neighbor beside her is attracting them with his bird feeders and shooting them. So she calls the agency comes out and goes, well, there's nothing to stop him from doing that. But I believe that if the public had to get some kind of permission, just like every hunter or angler does before they take wildlife, and even if it's just a simple online free or cheap permit, simple automated process where they just go on and say, I want to trap, and be given a limited time permit of 2 weeks to a month at the most, 1 to 2 traps, so forth. That way, when law enforcement is called out by a complaint, the officer can now have some power to do something.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me how we decide these classifications for animals and what animals get what rights in a variety of circumstances, whether it's through hunting or through being on private property. But you brought up traps, and I want to know more, and I'm sure our listeners would want to know more. The well-intentioned listener that wants to doesn't want that animal inside of their home or in their garage or whatever it may be, and what is the best method both for you and for that animal to continue to live a happy long life?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one. Basically, trapping is just not humane. It doesn't matter what kind of trap it is. Some traps are maybe a little more humane than others, but trapping in general is not humane. I've seen animals die in a cage trap, Plus, trapping doesn't normally solve the problem. It just puts a Band-Aid on it. You take an animal out of its territory, you're just opening it up for another animal to move in. And then, of course, in the springtime, we have the situation, and I run into this every spring, and I'm still waiting for the first call where somebody traps a mother raccoon and relocates her, and then comes home and hears the babies in the wall. And so, you know, the thing that gets me is like if people's car breaks down, they call a car mechanic. If the plumbing goes bad, they call a plumber. But when they have a wildlife problem, they go, "Oh, I can handle that," and they run down to the hardware store and buy a trap, and now they think they're Daniel Boone. And it really the amount of times the calls that I get where somebody's already screwed up and now I'm supposed to try and straighten the problem out. And it's really makes it tough. I had somebody just the other day, they saw a hole going under their porch. And so I talked to them and said, what do you think it is? And they thought it might be rabbits, but it could be a raccoon. And so then the lady texts me and says, well, just went and bought a trap. We set a trap. And I said, well, what are you going to catch? And she said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I mean, first you need to figure out what's going on. And so I finally talked to her and her husband and got them well, their friend was in town and he knows all about wildlife because he lives next to a bay in Houston. So that makes him a wildlife expert. And so I had to try and I was actually getting angry with the woman because she just wasn't listening. And I finally got it through to her. She was actually in her car with her husband there. And I talked to both of them and they finally said, okay, we'll take the trap down. Because I said, if you leave a trap set out on your deck, I said, you're going to catch something eventually. It could be the neighbor's cat, could be the wrong raccoon, but you're going to catch something. Just, don't worry about it. So they did. But yeah, that's the problem is that people don't know what they're doing, but they're sure as heck going to try,
And aren't there, Jack, when I hear stories like that, aren't there ways that we can not get there in the first place? And if you or Katherine could talk about what are some prevention things folks can do to not have the conflict in the first place? How can we be better neighbors with our wildlife?
Well, a lot of that goes down to, I do a lot of animal proofing. Like there's certain places that animals live. They're going to live under sheds. They're going to live under decks. They're going to live in attics, chimneys, capping chimneys. Every once in a while, check your roof line. Make sure that you don't have flashing falling off or wood rotting or something like that. Decks. When people build a deck, you're basically building a den for an animal, especially if you're building it over a concrete slab. Same thing with sheds. And so I do a lot of animal proofing. And so, for instance, like on a deck, you want to dig a trench around the deck and bury some wire from the deck down into the ground and then bend it so it goes out about a foot. That way an animal can't get under the deck. And so if I do have somebody that does have an animal that's under the deck and there's no babies, then I would animal proof it, put in a one-way door, which allows the animal to get out but not get back in. And then after we know the animal's out, then you take off the one-way door and seal it up. That way you've evicted the animal, but you haven't relocated them. They're still in the same territory. They have the same friends. They have the same food. Nothing for them changes. They just can't live under that deck anymore. So that's the whole idea behind it. And there's a lot of different ways of dealing with wildlife problems other than trapping. It's just that trapping has kind of traditionally been the thing to do for decades. And now we're getting into that age where we're learning better and more effective and more humane methods. And so that's what I try and push.
If I can add on to that, what he's describing is technically called exclusion. And it is becoming well known in the wildlife control industry that is where the money really is doing the repairs or doing preventative exclusion work. So, if you're worried about that, you can actually hire somebody to come out and strictly to do exclusion. And they will go over your house, find every dime-sized hole, seal everything up. It's not cheap, but it usually should come with a very good warranty. And that is the best thing that people can do. But beyond the house and the structure, you have the bird feeders, the cat feeders, the unsecured trash, the fruit trees, the dirty grill. You have all these things that are saying, hey, animals, come on in. And if you don't want that, you have to pay attention to those things. You are responsible for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned quite a bit about exclusion in my quest to stop certain rodenticides from being used in Colorado. I'm curious too about the one-way door. So say it's a deck. You have created a perimeter that the animal cannot get back in except for there's one area that the animal can get out. How do you tease that animal out of that door? How do they find that door?
You don't have to usually you put the door right where the entry is. And it's not just on a deck. Let's just say squirrels are getting into an attic. So you put a one-way door over the hole, or raccoons getting into an attic, put a one-way door over the hole. Uh, you don't usually they'll find it because they're going to look for a way out. And so, like if I'm doing a deck, I agree. If it's a deck, what I always do, I'll mark with a marker right on both sides of where the entry point is. So that after I dig a trench, I know exactly where that entry point was. That's where I put the one-way door. Obviously, on an attic, if they're coming through a roof vent, you put the one-way door over the roof vent, and the squirrel's been coming in and out of that. And I've actually seen squirrels come out. They come out of the roof vent and they come out the one-way door, and they're all confused. They can't get back in. They get upset for a couple minutes. They turn around and leave. So it works really good. I've never had an animal not find a one-way door. They always can find a way out.
Yeah, the one-way door is a fantastic tool. And it is a good thing that we see a lot of nuisance wildlife control operators starting to use them more and more. The problem is that they're not as well versed in animal behavior and baby seasons as they think they are. And for example, in Florida, we have baby season 365 days a year here, and even up north, where birthing season for raccoons, for example, used to not start before March or April. Now we're seeing babies in Philadelphia and Michigan in December. So you can't rush to use a one-way door with the assumption that there's no babies involved, because if you block out a mother squirrel, for example, goes out that one-way door and once back into her baby, she's going to chew a hole back in. And now you have an angry homeowner, about the destruction. Usually, almost always, when you hear about damage like these animals causing, it is because somebody made a mistake.
I could add to that too. Some of the trappers will say that, you shouldn't use a one-way door because of that. You could lock babies in. But my argument against that is that if you're trapping, it's the same thing. I mean, how many people trap a squirrel and relocate it, and then they find out there's babies in the attic? So if there's babies, you just have to be careful and take a totally different approach. And of course, spring is basically baby season. But in Colorado, squirrels give birth twice a year. The population gives birth twice a year. So 6 months out of the year, you have to be really, really paranoid when you're doing a squirrel job.
Yeah, those squirrels are pretty adorable when they're angry too. There's nothing better than, I mean, I feel bad for the angry squirrel, but they're pretty cute. No, I'm wondering too, beyond mammals, are you guys doing reptile work too, especially in Florida? Are there things that folks can do if you've got snakes or lizards or other things that you're concerned about around your home?
Well, if you're worried about snakes, the first thing to do is to, again, eliminate the attractant. What's attracting a snake is going to be the rodents and so forth. So if you're being diligent about keeping your trash, picking up your fruit, not allowing those attractants, then you're not going to have rodent predators like snakes or coyotes or skunks or other animals. When you get into the non-native reptiles, that's a whole other industry now, a whole other set of rules. They cannot be re-released if they're non-native. So we do have that, and fortunately, I have people that do deal with that I can refer to.
Yeah, that is an issue in Florida, right? Is that those are pythons that are non-native that are wrecking havoc out there?
Oh, there's quite a few pythons and tegus and other kinds of lizards, and they're mostly in South Florida, but they're slowly working their way up.
Oh gosh, that does not sound fun. I am sad about that. I'd love for the end of this episode to really talk about some fun stories you have from being in the field. And I'd love to hear, anecdotes from each of you about, a positive or funny experience you've had in this kind of work in mitigating wildlife deemed as nuisances and also in wildlife rescue.
And before we get there,
go ahead, Mark.
I want to end on fun. Okay.
Okay, fine.
But I want to know more about 411 wildlife and what the goal is for that organization.
Okay, well, I can speak to that. Several years ago, if you're familiar with the app and website Animal Help Now, which is based in Colorado, where anybody can use the app or the website, put in their zip code, and find the closest rehabilitator to help an injured or distressed wildlife, the owner of that, Dave Crawford, decided that he wanted to start listing truly humane wildlife control operators so people could find help when they didn't want the animal killed, and they, wouldn't get ripped off and could trust and so forth. So we worked with them to do that. And obviously we don't have enough of them across this country. So Jack and I are two that agreed to be listed in every single zip code across the country. So we get calls from everywhere. And if we can refer them to an operator that's near them, great. But if there's not, then we can help them DIY their situation, and we talk them through it all the way to the end, to the repairs, everything. And if they do need services, like an elderly person or whatever that does need on-site services, we will work with their local operator and say, listen, this is what she wants, and you need to do it this way. And almost all the time, that operator goes, I don't care how I get, how I do it, just as long as I get paid. So this has kind of grown into, how can we do this more? We want to attract the people who seriously want to resolve their conflict properly, not just for their property protection, for their wallet protection, but also for the animal protection, because we're protecting consumers, not just animals and people's property. So we decided to create this hotline, which I always put in quotation marks because it's not technically 24/7, but it is about 7 days a week from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, where you will be able to reach somebody that day to help guide you on what your conflict is. And that's what we're rolling out in the next couple of weeks.
That's amazing. I think that is a gap that I'm happy that y'all are filling. So now on to Sam.
No,
No.
Now I have follow-up questions, Marks, and you've started a whole other thread now. I don't even want to hear my fun stories anymore. Now I'm here for the facts and not for the fun. No, I think that's great. And is that just the two of you now offering yourselves up that much for 7 days a week, answering the phone and helping folks around the country? Wow. Thank you for that. And I hope that as you talk to operators too in other areas, they'll learn from you and then say, oh, hey, I tried this one place and it worked. If you're interested in doing it that way, it's an interesting way to get at the industry too, by walking them through it. So thank you for that. And I am back for the fun now. I just wanted to express my gratitude. So Mark, did you have anything else before we get to the fun?
Let's bring the fun.
Okay. Jack, did you want to kick us off with an interesting rescue rehab mitigation story?
Go out on that one, but just thinking of an exciting one that happened, and this is probably about 5 years ago. Somebody in the South Metro area they were walking out to their car one morning and they heard this little screaming sounds. And they finally determined that it was baby raccoons, and they were in a column on their porch. The column went up, and there was a hollow spot at the top, and they had gone down there. Well, something happened to the mom. Most likely it was an affluent neighborhood, so most likely somebody had trapped the mom or had the mom trapped. And so now these babies were stuck about 10, 12 feet down inside of a stone column. And they had called 2 different pest control companies. They couldn't get them out. Fire department couldn't get them out. Animal control couldn't get them out. And I went out there, and it was a tough one because it was a column that went up, and about maybe 10 inches above the column was where the ceiling of the porch was. So you couldn't really get anything down there. And so I finally rigged up, I had in my truck a piece of PVC pipe, like 1-inch PVC pipe. It was about 12 feet long. And so I took duct tape and taped a net to the end of that and could bend it enough to get it down into the column. And I pulled out 5 baby raccoons, and all of them went into rehab. But that was a pretty exciting one because these guys had been down there for like 5 days. Matter of fact, I think it's on my Facebook page, on Urban Wildlife Rescue's Facebook page. The big picture behind your little profile is me giving water to one of those little baby raccoons. That's on the Facebook page because they were pretty dehydrated, but they all did fine. They all went into rehab and they all did fine. But still, like I tell people, rehabbers do a good job, but not as good as their mother, so it's best to keep them with the mother. But, like when springtime hits, I usually have PTSD by the end of spring, because it's pretty intense. It gets pretty intense. And when people call you on the phone sometimes and they tell you these horrendous stories and you have to try and deal with that and try and straighten it out. And it really gets tough. And so that's why I say with the fun stories, it kind of puts me on the spot. That was one that I really felt good about. But I've had others where, you rescue a fox or you rescue this, things like that. It's just a constant, but a lot of it just kind of blurs together. That's why I say it's just a lot. I do this 7 days a week, so it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
constantly responding. I'm sure that's exhausting.
And I love the sound. I had baby raccoons when I lived in Florida. They popped their heads out. They were living in my attic, and they make the most adorable little dolphin-like sounds.
You're right, Mark. And I had a friend whose daughter worked at a dolphin research center. And I used to say to her, I said, nobody's ever done the research on the similarity between the sounds between raccoons and dolphins. There's something there.
They're communicating with each other somehow. There's a raccoon that's out on the shoreline sending messages to the sea.
I could see that. They're both very smart animals.
They
They're
are.
trying to take over both land and sea. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll think of 10 funny stories after we hang up from this call, of course, but um, one's coming to mind other than, being up in an attic, trying to check for babies or find a nest and having, a raccoon use my head or a squirrel use my head as a launch pad and not believing that the mother was up there only to turn around and find her like 5 feet away. But, I mean, they can be very protective, but they can also be very rational, thank goodness. But, just one of my favorite jobs was way back in the beginning. It was down in Fort Lauderdale, and people called me. They said, we have a raccoon on our porch patio area. We've been poking it with a stick for hours. We can't get it to leave. And I said, okay, well, one, stop poking a wild animal with a stick. I'm on my way.
Yeah.
It's like,
Uh-huh.
big no. So they had a very large enclosed screened back porch around the pool and a tiki bar area and everything. And we were standing there and I said, the raccoon's up in the rafters above the bar. And I said, this is acting like a mother raccoon. No, there's no babies. And before he could even finish his sentence, there comes that chirp right over my head. And I said, get a ladder. I'll show you. They're right here. She's like, 10 feet to the left, but the babies are right here. And he looked up and he saw them. And he went from adamantly wanting her out of there today to, well, maybe she can stay. We'll just let her stay and we'll play it by ear. And it was really cold that week. I think it was February. And I said, I really don't want to evict her today in this cold weather. Can I come back in a couple of days? No charge for the trip charge, but let me just wait till the weather's a little better. So they had said that. But then a couple of days later, they said, you know what? It's still cold. Let's leave her be. We've named her Ricky, and the kids are going watching her out the window when they eat breakfast. So this went on, for the several weeks before she left. As by the way, the mother raccoon denning situation always ends with the mother leaving and taking her babies with her if left alone and nothing, disturbs her. So that happened, and that was a good story. But otherwise, it's just people calling and saying, I've got critters, squirrels getting in my bird feeder. I need you to come trap them. And I said, well, first, would you please try putting a sign on the bird feeder that says this is for birds only? And there's quiet for a minute, and they say, will that work? No, that won't work. No. There's a lot of education that needs to be done. But the problem is that people don't want to be educated about this till it happens to them. And then they are a very captive audience. And those are the people I love working with.
Yeah. Yeah. I watched a very funny video that I think was served to me in my TikTok algorithm of a squirrel, two squirrels, and an owl on a fence. And the title was The Day the Squirrels Had Enough. No. The squirrel jumped from the fence on top of the owl and was like, get away from here. And the owl finally left. And I was like, I have never seen that. I guess the squirrels do stand up for themselves sometimes.
I definitely fall on this side of things of I have a backyard pond. I do have a bird feeder, and the fox will come and the raccoons will come to the pond, and it's just it's not very large, but it's large enough for it to be an attractant. And I had coyotes visit my front door the other night, and I always welcome it, but at the same time, I don't want to be. I think is there a fine line between being the neighbor that is attracting wildlife and causing an issue and being able to provide a drink for wildlife that lives in your area without it creating more problems? Like, how does someone like me know where to draw the line?
That is an age-old tough question that I don't know if there is a good answer for that. It just depends on your neighbors. Because, like, I know in my neighborhood, I do feed the birds, I do feed the squirrels. I've got a neighbor across the street that absolutely hates squirrels, so her whole front yard is covered with pinwheels, those little things that
Sure.
blow in the wind, to keep squirrels off of her yard, and it's like, but that's why I said earlier, it's like I've had situations, or even now, like people call me up and go, yeah, we've got squirrels in our attic, and the people 3 houses down are feeding squirrels. Well, that's two different things. They're feeding squirrels, you got a hole in your roof, and so they're
Right.
not related. But people, I don't think there's a perfect answer for that. I think that if you live in a neighborhood where everybody's wildlife friendly, there's not going to be a problem. But all it takes is one person, like Sam said that earlier. All it takes is one person to say, I don't like these squirrels, and they hire a trapper. A trapper comes out there and sets traps and gets rid of it.
But
I don't think there's a
it
perfect
doesn't
answer.
solve the problem. Yeah, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? I mean,
No.
squirrels come back a few months later, and they spend more money to do it again, and they finally give up. It doesn't matter how you feel about wildlife. Someone in your neighborhood is going to have a bird waterer or a bird feeder or loose trash or something that's going to attract them. You're responsible for your property, and they may cross through. They may drink out of your water. They may clean up the spilt bird seed, but that's not a conflict. And people need to stop being allowed to view that as a conflict and to retaliate against our wildlife. That's why we said we need to define that nuisance and conflict.
Yeah. If I could bring up too, just really quickly mention, just when we were talking about the trapping part of it, something a lot of people don't realize. They call it now compensatory rebound. It's had different names over the years, but basically what that means is that when you take animals out, you're opening up a void in the habitat. And that means that the animals that are either the same type of animal or a similar type of animal now have more room, they have more food, they might as well make more babies. And so when you start trapping, all you're doing is causing the population to increase over time. It's not going to increase quickly, but it's going to increase over time. And I mean, they've done so many studies on this. It's like, and I've even seen it too, where like, in one study I read where they had two adjacent areas where they had skunks. One area people trapped skunks and the other area people did not. In the area where they did not trap skunks, the average litter was 4 to 6. An average where they did trap a lot, the average litter was 9 to 12. And so the animals are going to make up for that difference. Like I tell the example I use so most people can understand it, if you have a tree or a bush and you want it to grow bigger, what do? You trim it back, and then it grows back fuller. Well, an animal population does the same thing.
That's such a great analogy. I've never put it together with a tree or a bush, but I will certainly use that in the future. So, well, thank you both. This has been very informative and fun as well. And I just wanted to finish here on places we can reach both of you for whether it's for the services needed or for more education.
Yeah, for me, you can email me, Jack at Urban Wildlife Rescue, or anybody can call me, and that number is 303-340-4911. We do have a website, urbanwildliferescue.org, and I am on Facebook. That's Urban Wildlife Rescue, Inc. And that's that. And Katherine?
411 Wildlife Solutions at Gmail. That is also the name of my Facebook page, 411 Wildlife Solutions. Our new 800 number is 877 Wild 411. And the website will be, I believe it's 411wildlife.org. That should be launched this month.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really helpful to get the word out on how folks can be better neighbors to animals. And we appreciate you for doing that and all the time you're putting into this, because I know it's exhausting, hard work, and it really matters. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that Jack had just finished up with really sunk in with me, that he was talking about our houses being habitat, right? Our neighborhoods being habitat. And we need to remember it. HOAs and all of those things are not existent in the rest of the animal world. It is habitat. And it's how we choose to live with our neighbors in that habitat is most important. So thank you again. This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.